Thank you so much, and welcome to this inaugural conference of the Commission for Gender Equality. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome our panelists for this very first session, meaning that you are the first of the first. It's the first conference, and this is the first panel, and you're our first ever panelists. Thank you so much. I would like to make a disclaimer, however, folks, that the nature of this engagement ought to be robust, and we should go where we have never gone before in this conversation, in this dialogue. It is not a surface level and superficial engagement, or else then we wouldn't be here. We are here to dive into the deepest depths of the ocean in terms of the engagement around gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. And you've all been brought here, not by accident, but because we're very knowledgeable about your areas of expertise and your experience in working with survivors, as well as creating interventions and solutions. So without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Craig Wilkinson, who is the founder of the national NPO called Father a Nation, which was a response to the pervasive crisis of fatherlessness in South Africa, and has worked in this space for over a decade in restoring male leadership, role models, and mentorship. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilkinson, for joining us this morning. Next, we have Ms. Josina Mashal, who is a human rights activist who advocates for the eradication of gender-based violence and femicide in our lifetime. Ms. Mashal holds an MSc in sociology from the London School of Economics and Political Science. She's also the founder of Protect Her Life, which is an insurance company that seeks to support the safety of women who are subjected to the exceptionally high levels of gender-based violence and femicide in our society. And finally, joining us this morning is Ms. Nkabele Marumo, who holds a master's degree in clinical psychology from the University of the Witwatersrand and brings to this panel over 30 years of experience both locally and internationally. She is committed to addressing intergenerational trauma, the psychological impact of apartheid, and family violence, especially against women and children. Let us begin. First, by laying down the foundations of the conversation. What is gender-based violence and femicide? Let's just get that out of the way so that we're not having a discourse on different levels. Universally, gender-based violence and femicide is seen to be violence, or rather unfair discrimination, and the creation of arbitrary biases and harmful privileges based solely on the premise of sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So with that having been said, anyone can be a perpetrator and a victim of a gender-based violence in our society. Of course, we don't want to be blind to the fact that it is ordinarily women and children who are the main survivors and victims. And our most recent report highlights that as well. So from a historical perspective, 6 years down the line, 2018, we had the total shutdown march. The chairperson gave a great context about what has happened historically in the country. But we have another chapter in the book of history that says, in 2018, up until now, it has been the feminist movement led by girls, women, and queer persons that has tried to bring to the fore the issue of gender-based violence and femicide, starting in 2018 with the total shutdown, which brought in over 100,000 activists and advocates, up until now having the NSP GBVF, and now the council that has been passed into law. So my question to everyone on the panel this morning, you've got about 5 to 10 minutes to answer this question, is what are those pervasive issues, those nagging issues and challenges that you have encountered in your work and in your experience, especially insofar as leadership and accountability is concerned, insofar as response and healing and prevention is concerned, and insofar as safety, justice, and socioeconomic considerations is concerned. I'm going to start from here, my nearest panelist, and then you can go ahead and give that introductory address, 5 to 10 minutes on these aspects insofar as gender-based violence and femicide is concerned in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, interesting enough, I'm wearing so many hats. I was invited as a chairperson of Village Alabantu, which is an organization that started 35 years ago, focusing mainly on violence against women and children in Gugulethu. It's still standing. And I think we all know how it's true. It is difficult, and sometimes one feels quite disillusioned about how the trends are actually getting higher, and the gruesome acts of violence are actually getting more puzzling. But like I say, the other head, of course, is that one of, I've been privileged to work a bit with CGE as a consultant, and I've got a fair view of how the struggle and how much they're trying to deal with issues around gender inequality. And given the very, how can I put it, I'm trying to find very meager, as it were, I don't know whether I'm writing the word, but it's almost like an allowance to deal with issues that are as vast as gender inequality. But I think for me, the most interesting one is in terms of dealing with violence against, against the most vulnerable groups in our society, be it women, be it children, be elderlies, be LGBTQIA persons, and is the fact that there's very little understanding of what this is really about. It's quite complex. It's very, and if we look at our history particularly, it's actually even more worrying. Because I think 1994, in our quest to make everybody happy, I must say, controversial as it may be, we sort of like silenced ourselves a bit. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission didn't go far enough to sort of like say, what are we inheriting? And I think as I work through or work with people, and I look at structural violence, I work with some of the military veterans who've been exposed to one of the most violent acts and brutal activities when they're in jail. Women who have been like electrocuted, a lot of things, and some people are sitting with psychosis of things that they don't make sense about. And here we are trying to make sense of why are we here? And so for me, it makes sense. And the question that I always ask, how come we did not deal with it the way we're supposed to deal with? So I think that's all that I can say. But then, having grown in a rural community and having forced to go back forth now between Gauteng and West, Northwest, actually it's just more disheartening to see how we have disempowered. And I dare say, and actually I'm going to say it with a straight face, that I think our government has actually disempowered communities. Because we moved from there, remember it was autocratic, it was authoritative, we couldn't move, we didn't have a government. And then we moved to the extreme end of the laissez-faire type of a thing where it's like everybody can do what they like. The very idea of wanting to give children, disempowering children as well, and taking over the responsibilities of parents. I think for now, that's all that I can say. But and I was one of those who went to Beijing in 1995, excitedly so, starry-eyed. It was so much fun. We really believed that we could change the world. I was in the Department of Labor at the beginning of democracy, and we believed that we could make a difference. So are we serious about GBV and femicide and violence against children? And I say we are not serious. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You can go ahead, Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you so much. We can change the world, and we will.
Yes, we can, but we still not see it.
We are, I agree, yeah. Thank you so much for the honor of being here, especially surrounded by ladies and women. For me, the biggest challenge that we find is that we're not dealing with the root cause. We're not dealing with the prevention. You know, we're creating awareness, which is important. We need to, but that doesn't solve the problem. You know, for years and years and years and years, I went to meeting after meeting after meeting, and I'd hear exactly the same thing, stating the stats. And look, the stats are horrendous. I mean, this is a tragedy. We need to take it more than seriously. But we'd hear over and over again, you know, 1 in 3 women. We'd hear the stats over and over, and we've heard this, and we know this. We wouldn't hear reasons and solutions. And for me, we have to delve deep into why, you know, no boy is born an abuser. Let's be honest, no boy comes out of his mother's womb DNA wired to abuse or to be a racist or to be anything like that. These things are learned. Something happens on the journey from boy to man. Something goes wrong on the journey from boy to man. The instinct of a healthy man is to protect, never ever to abuse, never ever. I mean, it's just not in the DNA of man. So we've got to say, what goes wrong on the journey from baby to boy and boy to man? And for me, that's what we've been focusing on at Father a Nation. And we've had the privilege of working in all 9 provinces. We've got a beautiful team of men and women on the ground working with men, because a healthy whole man leads to a healthy whole society. A healthy whole man leads to a safe home. So why, what goes wrong? Now, we have to look at our history. I mean, we've got a brutal history. We've got a discriminatory history. And as we had we had a political miracle, we haven't had an emotional healing miracle, an economic miracle. We haven't had exactly what you're talking about. The Truth and Reconciliation didn't go far enough to bring healing to our nation. Now, abuse, as you know, works in cycles. A boy who's abused often becomes a man who is abusive. So how do we break the cycle? Now, for me, if we look at the reasons, and for me, we've distilled it down into 4, I mean, this is a very complex issue, but 4 main reasons why, of what goes wrong on the journey from boy to man. Number 1, wounded masculinity. Wounded masculinity. Both boys and girls need both mothers and fathers for different reasons. I can't teach my daughter how to be a woman. My wife has to do that. My wife cannot teach my son how to be a man. He needs a man. It doesn't have to be a biological father, but an older man to teach and model to him what it means to be a man. So in the absence of this, in broken households, broken families, communities where there's a lack of fathers, boys grow up unmentored and untaught about what it means to be a man, undisciplined. And what do they look to? They look to the gangster on the street corner. They look to a rap star. They look to the wrong kind of role models as to how to be a man. So 4 reasons. Wounded masculinity. A boy growing up unvalidated, unnurtured, unloved, undisciplined, untaught, grows up wounded. And the wound that a man carries is the wound of, I'm inadequate. Because the big question on a boy's heart, do I have what it takes to be the man that this world needs me to be, to provide, to love, to serve, to honor, to protect? And if he grows up not believing that, not having been validated in that, he grows up wounded. And what does he do? He either becomes very passive and abandons. And we see a lot of that in homes around the country. Men who have a child and abandon their child. Or he becomes aggressive and abusive. And why is a man aggressive? He wants to prove that I'm a man. I've got the power. He doesn't feel like he has. It's a sense of inadequacy. That's why I said a healthy man could never, ever rape. Because there's nothing sexual about a woman who's scared. No, the instinct of a healthy man is to protect, never ever. So broken, wounded masculinity, number 1 cause. And there are many reasons. That's a weekend seminar. Number 2, false concepts of what it means to be a man. We grow up in a society that gives us 5 lies about masculinity. Sex, power, money, big boys don't cry, and men are trash. All of these are big lies. See, it's not about sexual conquest that makes a man. It's about fidelity and love and faithfulness. And it's not about power, not about money. The poorest man can leave behind the richest legacy because it's not what he brings to the table. You know, in society, I mean, Chris Rock made the joke. He said, only women, children, and pets are loved unconditionally. Men have to bring something, you know. And he said it in humor, but there's a truth in that. Society dictates that men have to bring. And if they can't, you know, so it's about sex, power, money. Big boys don't cry. You know, men commit suicide 4 times more than women globally. And one of the reasons is we don't share. We're not vulnerable. We know we feel we have to, so we take our lives. And men are trash. Such a terrible lie that men are trash. Men are not trash. Men can grow up to behave in a very trashy way. But if we tell our boys that men are trash, they grow up thinking, well, I'm trash anyway. I might as well behave. It doesn't help us fix the problem. Number 3, misconceptions about the value of women. We grow up not seeing women as equal partners. Every one of us here exists and is alive because a man and a woman came together, no pun intended, and we were born, we were conceived, okay? And the world continues to operate when a man and a woman, where masculine and feminine, co-create, build as equal but different partners this beautiful world. We need both. And number 4, emasculating circumstances. You know, unemployment is devastating in this country, and it's interesting to see the way women and men react differently to unemployment. A woman will do her very best to nurture and protect. A man often will go into things like alcohol, etc., because he feels emasculated. So if we look at these 4 reasons and we begin to heal these, and one of the main things is to teach men how to be good men, teach boys how to be good men, inspire them, motivate them to be good men, and to restore fathers to our nation. Restore the elders. It takes a village to raise a child, and often those villages, metaphorical villages, are lacking good, stable, whole male mentors. Single moms are heroes in this nation, absolute heroes. But it's impossible to do this alone. We have to co-create the future. Let me stop before you get too carried away.
Thank you so much. Ms. Marshall, before you go ahead, I just want to introduce our final panelist for this morning, Advocate Mikateko. Oh, sorry? Esther Maluleka. Sorry about that, ma'am. I just wanted to introduce our final panelist for this morning, who is an admitted advocate of the High Court of South Africa. Sorry? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. My apologies. My apologies. I think yes. Go ahead. Yes. Thank you very much. Sorry. You can proceed, Ms. Marshall. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I think, I had planned to speak about a few things that had to change. Well, one of the issues, the first one is to say I'm wearing a different hat today. Mm-hmm. I am the founder of Kuhluka Movement, which is an organization that mainly works in Mozambique and in South Africa, giving face and giving voice to survivors of violence. So my focus always is to say, where are the survivors, where are the victims and the survivors in the room? Where are the victims and the survivors when we look at policies, when we look at programs, when we make plans? We need to consider that a huge majority, right, of the numbers and the people that we cater for when we look at issues of gender-based violence are survivors, being men, young boys, being women, being children, but it's survivors that we're looking at. So the programs need, even when it comes to prevention, we need to actually look and say, what does this group actually have to contribute? Because, yes, we look at a young woman who is abused at 19. She becomes a mother at 26. She's going to be raising a boy at 26. What kind of experience will she pass to this boy? What kind of relationship does she have with the man who is the father, who is the husband, and what role does this man have? We normally tend to think that, well, abuse has happened, life has moved on, 6 years down the line, it has passed. No, it actually takes, and I love the work that you're doing, because it also takes a very courageous man to get involved, to care, to protect, and to love a woman who's been abused. Because unfortunately, abuse is long-term, can start as a child, can happen. To me, it happened when I was 39 years old. Lost my eye, and now, for example, the man that I'm involved with has to deal with that Josina who cannot deal or cannot hear very sharp sounds, very fast sounds, because she jumps out. The Josina who bumps into furniture every evening if the lights are not on because she cannot see that. Now think about that. That's just someone who lost an eye. But imagine what then intimacy and everything else means for a woman who has been raped, right? So we need to look at all these. We need to think, what are the issues that women who have been abused and children who have been abused deal with at schools? How are they dealt with in church? How are they dealt with in the workplace? Our workplace is where we spend 8 hours a day, right? So really, if we don't have adequate procedures and we have processes to actually cater for this group of abused people, being women or men, right? We are not going to get the best out of them in the daily lives. So a few years ago, President Ramaphosa stated that, this is a war against women. And women, because we all know the majority, right? But it will include all the other groups. And it sounded very aggressive. It sounded very aggressive. I used that term, or I tend to use that term most of the time because it shakes people into what this really is. And we need to look at the reality. Where does it start? If we go for the minimum, most of us in this room, as women in particular, we leave our homes and we prepare ourselves already to deal with our daily realities, right? How does it start? You start thinking, I lock my car when I get when I need to make sure that my car is locked when I start driving. If someone comes next to you for some reason, when you're in a stop sign, you immediately start thinking, what's going on. You walk into a mall or you're going into work, just the fact that someone might say, hey, you look very beautiful. We already start going like, woo, where is this going? So that to demonstrate that women live on a daily basis in a situation of super defense, super protection, right? And actually of suspicion of everything. That is in the minimum. It's harassment, is discrimination. That's in the minimum. Excluding then the ones that are emotionally abused, right? That are physically abused, that are patrimonially abused, sexually abused, physically. So all these things are our reality. And we need to actually start thinking of what we do then. Leadership, yes, we do have, we're actually doing a bit better. Let's recognize. And when we look at the world stage, in Africa in particular, South Africa is leading when it comes to leadership. I am not talking about implementation. I am not talking about results yet. We need to see, and actually I'll come to that one. You mentioned something, or you requested that we actually be open about this conversation. At that moment, I had to write something that came to my mind a few days ago. Do we all remember how South Africa reacted when we had the rape case of former President Jacob Zuma? That was a defining moment when it comes to the history of gender-based violence and femicide in this country. That was a defining moment because we knew what had happened. We decided to take a position of ignoring the reality, validating the story of a perpetrator, and having a perpetrator represent us on a daily basis. What message did that send to men, and what message did that send to women in this country? From then onwards, what we have seen is really an escalation of all that. It's normalization of violence, because really you can get away with it. How many people in this country, and when we look at numbers and percentage, how many people can actually say that they have experienced justice, they have tasted, they have seen, and they know what justice is about? How many men can actually say that, hey, I was caught badly, so I need to pay for it? No. What we do is then, it starts with the whole thing. The alleged rapist, I know legals will say that, Josina, let's not go into it. But it's always the alleged rapist. It's the alleged murderer, so on and so forth. Just yesterday, I'm not sure if you're aware, the guy who actually killed the athlete in Uganda, the Ugandan athlete, died. So yesterday, he then stopped being the alleged abuser or the alleged murderer. Now they're saying the murderer of. But for all that, for all these weeks, we know who put fire, who set her on fire, right? Why do we still go into this alleged? And all these alleged take years. So, you know, we need to start looking, and I have to stop talking because I can go on and on. We need to start looking really at what our society is ready to do. And what are we personally ready to do in this room, in positions of leadership, and to try to change this pandemic, because it is a pandemic. We need to look at exactly the issue of patriarchy and culture, because it is a huge excuse. Patriarchy, well, I don't think there are many options now. But, you know, we still look at the issue, oh, in my culture, that's allowed. Oh, in my culture, I grew up like this. And then you go to the traditional leader, you go to the, to our traditional leadership. And, you know, we all excuse ourselves just in the way we approach them. It's already like, I'm really sorry to be talking about this, but you need to take a different position. We need to be strong on that and say, excuse me, you are a man because you came out of a woman's womb. You were cared for, treated, and taught, well, not taught to be a man, you're actually right, but you came out of a woman. Women are a reality in this community. And if we go back in our history, women had a different position in our cultures. Women were able to take positions and actually give serious opinions to the change and the evolution of our communities. Then we need to seriously look at the issue of accountability. If we do not become accountable, if we do not force accountability, we will be sitting in this room in 30 years' time with the same numbers, because the young people that are raised today, that are seeing the mess in which we are, and this attitude of being blasé and saying, well, we are seeing, but maybe we are not seeing, these young people will be the women and the men that will lead this country, that will lead this continent, and will lead the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Michelle. And our last panelist, Ma'am Esther, you can go right ahead. So the question is, what are some of those pervasive, niggling issues and challenges insofar as leadership and accountability is concerned, insofar as prevention, response, and safety is concerned, as well as justice, as well as socio-economic considerations? Any of those you can tackle, really.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning. As said earlier on, I'm Esther Maluleke from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. And it's a problem in a situation like that to start with an apology. But unfortunately, I have to apologize, and sincerely so, because I was redirected just this morning to another task by the minister that I couldn't get away from. But I did send my apologies earlier on, and I'm pleased that I made it just in time to be able to fulfill this task that I committed to. In response to your question, yeah, it's a big question, but a very important question for that matter, and I'll speak about leadership and accountability, especially coming from government and being responsible for this particular program of monitoring and coordinating implementation of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence. And I'll only start, because the response by government to gender-based violence didn't start with the launch of the National Strategic Plan. I think everyone knows that almost for 30 years we've been trying, really, unsuccessfully so, to deal with this matter. But the launch of the National Strategic Plan was a defining moment, again, as you say. And from our perspective, the issue of leadership and accountability, and those that are familiar with the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, It's pillar 1. And it was made to top all other pillars because that's very critical. And it talks to leadership, accountability, and coordination. And since the launch of the National Strategic Plan, that's exactly what we've been trying to do as government. But I think it's important to mention that, yes, government has been trying to respond to this scourge, as I said, with really limited capability, because there's a serious issue of capacity in terms of systems in government. So when the National Strategic Plan was launched, it found a very weak system to absorb the strategy and be able to roll it out effectively. So what we needed to do as the department, because this is our mandate, is to make sure that the strategy is institutionalized. That's the first thing, because if any program in government that is not institutionalized is not going to go far. And what do I mean by institutionalization? I mean we need to ensure that the targets and indicators of the National Strategic Plan are integrated into the planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation system of government. So it starts at planning stage, where you need to ensure that the plans of departments, what we call strategic plans and annual performance plans, they reflect what each department needs to do in as far as the National Strategic Plan is concerned. So that's a mammoth task, because you don't only engage with your colleagues that are responsible for implementing the strategy, you also have to actually push the system in terms of leadership, in terms of heads of departments or director generals, deputy director generals, ministers, deputy ministers, you name them, until at cabinet level. So we've been at that task ever since for the past 4 years. And right now, accountability within government, we push it through the cluster system. So what we do is we consolidate reports in terms of the work that is done by departments in various departments. And before those reports reach the president, because that's the requirement, and now recently, and I'll explain later, we will be reporting to cabinet, not only to the president. So we account at cluster level, and we account at ministerial level, as well as now having to account to cabinet. So that's how accountability and leadership is pushed. When we started reporting on the implementation of the National Strategic Plan, only 10 departments were complying and giving us the reports. And that was almost 4 years ago when the National Strategic Plan was launched. But we are pleased to say today, on average, at least 28 departments report. The next challenge is what these departments are reporting on, which touches on the monitoring and evaluation of performance and outcomes, by the way, not only performance. And what we are still struggling with is them reporting on exactly the targets and indicators of the National Strategic Plan. And I spoke about capacity earlier on. That's another good indication of the weakness in terms of capacity of the state. Because not every official that is responsible to do that has got the technical know-how in terms of how to ensure, firstly, that the target is integrated into a plan, and there's a lot of red tape still. If it's a junior official, for instance, it's very difficult to advocate and lobby and ensure that she's heard and that her issues are taken into account. So all I'm saying is there's a lot of capacity building that needs to happen at technical level, but also at accountability, leadership is very critical. So before I end, I need to mention, very critical, that recently, because we are also assessing how we are doing, and don't wait to the end of the strategy to start saying, you know, what are we doing wrong? What can we change? So we change as gear as we go along. And recently, the cabinet approved the concept of dealing with gender-based violence as if it's a pandemic. And the reason is because the president, as we all know, has publicly pronounced that this is a pandemic. But we are duly advised that only WHO can declare pandemic. We can't declare GBV as a pandemic. That is why you hear my caution around as if it's a pandemic. Those are things that we deal with and struggle with on a daily basis. Anyway, what this means is you referred to really the issue of leadership and accountability. But the strategy says, GBV, for us to really win this war, we need to approach it as a whole society, that each one of us is responsible. Yes, government, but you've heard what I said about capacity, which indeed we are trying to address and deal with, but we need also leadership. When we talk leadership, Pillar 1 doesn't only refer to leadership of politicians. It's leadership across the board. The church leadership, traditional leadership, any person that regards themselves as a leader should be able to take up this issue and help us deal with it, especially in terms of prevention. So this is what we are looking on, and what this concept says is we need to go down towards, because we talk about localization, but we really need to work at ward level. That's what the cabinet has directed us to do. So that issues that we've raised, working with survivors and victims on prevention, because that's where we believe we need to be invested in, primary prevention. Because what you're talking about is it's a level of secondary victimization, but we need to actually re-socialize society in terms of the way, you know, all those things that you've mentioned. But you can only do it if we are closer to communities, if we work with communities and ensure that they take responsibility. If we work with homes, because part of the challenge is penetrating homes where these crimes are perpetuated. And it's a hidden crime. That is why it's so difficult to deal with. And it happens behind closed doors. So one of the things that we need to do in as far as what this concept means is that we need to start rolling out evidence-based programs that we know, and there's quite a few of them, that we know work. We need to actually scale them. And some of those programs include parenting programs, and they're driven by Department of Social Development. So we can't deal with this scourge if we don't drive that leadership in families, where we can actually, where possible, be able to work with families to actually address this matter. So I've tried in a short space of time to just really go across in terms of government as an institution. What is it that we're trying to do? And I think I'll mention some of the things as we go along.
Yes.
In the next round.
Thank you so much. So that is our introductory remarks and addresses from all of our panelists. And now we're going to probe just a little bit deeper based on the contributions that have been made, as well as the context that we are practically living in South Africa. So, Mem Kabele, you had said something quite interesting about the necessity to heal, but also you've brought in a historical context that I think is important for us to consider. But I'm confused because in my own assessment, I look at what was life like as a young girl in the early 2000s and even in the 90s, although I don't remember much of that, but especially in the early 2000s. And juxtapose that to what it is to be a young woman now in 2024. And I'm trying to understand what is it exactly that changed. If we are locating, I think we can all agree on this panel that we're locating a lot of this trauma in colonization and in apartheid. We are saying that some of the manifestations of how we see gender-based violence unfolding, and many of the manifestations of violence in our society unfolding, they're gruesome. And they can be located in that era. But what is it that changed, that was so controlled in the early 2000s and went out of control in the past 10 years? Because you've spoken about how the numbers have jumped. You know, my question really is it really culture, ma'am? I mean, can we blame it really on culture? Is this a psychology, or is this something associated with socialization, or is it a psychopathy? Can we say that we have groomed an entire generation of people who, quite frankly, could be categorized as psychopaths, or is it a socialization that is a manifestation of a deeply rooted need of healing that came from hundreds of years of trauma? So I with your experience, I know it's a very complex, layered question, but with your experience, can you please enlighten us on that?
Sure, Commissioner. I hope I can be able to do it in the space of time. I think when you look at the structural violence of the colonial and the apartheid system, clearly it was it was quite deliberate in sort of like disempowering our communities. It was quite deliberate in terms of emasculating our men. It was quite deliberate in terms of breaking down the family structures. The migration system in particularly was one of those. And I think even the land thing, all those things, it happened over decades. And then what we couldn't deal with, because it was about anything, whether health, it was education, it was part of you, part of your life. And what we haven't been able to study quite well has been what we call epigenetics. And here it talks about not the DNA change, but how the DNA expresses itself to stress and all that. So I think the anxieties that have been there, that have been passed on, whether it's anxiety, whether the structural violence about how do you participate in the market, how are you able to take opportunities, this pain has been long-lasting. And I think for the longest of time, I believe that our idols, our parents, they held on too tight. They tried to, imagine when you're under stress, you hold on to so much tight in case anything breaks. And that's what they did. But I think in the advent, when then post-1994, I think there was a sense of sort of a relief of some sort to say, ish, it looks like now somebody's going to listen to us. It looks like something's going to change. And I think there's that disappointment, I think, that at the same time made it difficult. I come from a rural area where one of the schools that I went to was one of the best schools in the country. I can say that without even a station of doubt. But it was built by the community. It was a boarding school that attracted everybody. It was a community school that had teachers. Our principal would go to Eastern Cape, go and poach a teacher wherever, if he's good in maths and science. We had that mixture of ethnicity and all that in our school. And today, as we speak, parents cannot even afford to pay 50 rand Was the community poor? Maybe it was poor. We were aware of the differences in terms of like white, black, and that we're not. But we never actually saw ourselves as poor. There was pride, there was dignity. And so where did that go? So, and we look at parenting. Even if we grew up in families, suppose the father was not there, whatever, the social system was such that we had uncles, we had brothers who could look after everyone. Now, this notion of the village, it's a village, it's a talk. It doesn't apply at the moment, doesn't. So I'm just saying, if you're to do anything different, and I can hear Esther talking about how they must go into communities, I'm saying they don't have the capacity. Nor do you have the understanding. I have to hasten to say that. Because the understanding of how we need to give dignity to our people, to our young people, you go to, where is a township or village, how many young people are roaming the streets? How many of us now believe that you can look after your own children and you got the responsibility to do that? How many of us believe that? Our youngsters don't believe that. They believe that they can't do it. Their grandmothers, our mothers look after our children because they knew we're going to be working on something. You're either going to be studying or working. Now we're all staying at home. We're all looking after this grants. And where is our pride? So, but then if I've got to come back to the structural violence or even rape, and you said something just not very interesting, that it doesn't mean that after 4 years you're done, you healed, whatever. No. It works on you all the time, and people don't understand. So you're walking here, there is post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you know that even by the 90s, it was quite clear that South Africa had as high level of post-traumatic stress disorder as countries that are war-torn. And so where did it go? Those 90s, we're still sitting with there. Our post-traumatic stress disorder levels are the same as in America of young men who've come from war, from Afghanistan, and yeah. So it's about the depression and all that. So we're not necessarily working with people who are like psychopathic, but our people who are working the streets are those who are battling to adapt to the stress levels that they've been exposed to over time. And this we're passing on to our kids, we like it or not. We've got the high crime levels, the risk-taking behavior, promiscuity, unprotected sex, reckless driving, all these things. And I mean, even in terms of accidents, what do we think is happening to those accidents that are happening all the time here? Let alone malnutrition, let alone stunted growth. Can you talk about cognitive abilities next in how many years? Do you think we'll be having people, children, our youngsters who will be able to think? And I think for me, it's that type of, like we talk, like when governments speak about some of these things, it's like, it's like NGOs. And I'm not saying NGO because the NGOs that I'm working with are really, really critical in thinking. But we cannot have government wanting to behave like NGOs and think about NGOs and not push when they've got resources. We cannot have that. The resources are there. Now, the NSP, as we see it, how many years has it taken now for the bill to be passed? Where are the funds? If we can look at something like the national skills, and I'm sorry I may not answer everything that you ask, but if we're to look at the national skills fund of saying 1% or whatever had to go on for national for salaries and all that, we could do the same with GBV fund. But I think in this country, yes, we're dealing with a lot of mental health issues. Yes, we're dealing with a lot of depression, anxiety. Substance abuse is a big thing. But that in themselves is how we're trying to adapt to the pain and to the suffering that we experience every day. Social violence is still continuing. Continuous trauma is still continuing. Complex trauma, by the way, stress disorder, which is more about people who have been violated or people in captivity. We are actually captives in our own homes. So this thing has been going on. We have ignored it. and we are continuing to ignore it, but we're still not prepared to deal with it as we're supposed to. So for me, that's that. It's been historical, and we still, and it's happening. But and if we look at the fact that now we've got murders that like more murders than is happening in Ukraine at war. So we are a country at war, and I would also urge that we have to revoke the UN Resolution 1325 because of the high crime rate. We've got to revoke it in this country and start to see this thing for what it is. It's a war, and we cannot run away from it. But then we've got to start to look at our children, all of them, to start to say, our young men, whatever. The language has got to keep on changing. I think it was Commissioner Fundamental Super, the language has got to change. We've got to start to see our young people as people who are talented, who can be able to do something. But that will need all of us, it's true.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think this would be a good chance maybe for Ms. Maluleke to jump in here. I think you had said very important things. Number one, fund the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. But you'd also spoken about government and its lack of accountability thereof. But also very interestingly, Ms. Maluleke had spoken about evidence-based interventions and approaches. This has been a long-standing conversation over, decades now. And, Mr. Wilkinson even said he goes to events, we're repeating, I share the same sentiments, Mr. Wilkinson. And so my question then is, Ms. Maluleke, as a leader in the department, but also a leader in government, you had spoken about these interventions. Practically, what has been done? And also, what has been the impact on the ground of the NSP, which was launched in mid-2020, if I remember correctly? What has been the impact of that work practically in our society to date? And even when you look at things such as the 100 Days Challenges, which has been running since 2022, I was part of the first implementers and has been running for 2 years now. What has been the practical impact of that work around the NSP, from the 100 Days Challenges to the document as a strategic document of intervention, as well as just leveraging on what you've said about the need for evidence-based interventions when there's always been evidence-based interventions that government has ignored? So what has been the impact? What has been done practically?
Thanks for the question. Let me start by saying, Thando, it's difficult to talk about impact when we have not evaluated the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. And it's not because of failure of trying. But I think and Mam Kabela mentioned, part of the challenge and the incapacity I spoke about, it's really about resourcing. Because we wanted to roll out the evaluation, mid-evaluation of the NSP so that it can help us. So that by the end of the 5 years, at least, we would have changed our steps and have assessed whether we are moving in the right direction or not. But we were constrained by resources to actually conduct that study. And I'm going to talk, because that's the reality, even of the department, on having to do what it needs to do. We're talking about a capacity of 100 and something people with a mandate of women, youth, and persons with disabilities. You can hear the mandate and the scope is very, very wide, with a budget that is extremely limited. So I must just put it out there that that's the reality. And when you compare the capacity of the department with the rest of other government departments, I mean, it's a drop in the ocean. So I'm just wanting us to be also mindful of those limitations. So coming back to your question, we indeed are seeing a shift. There are things that are happening, and I must say we don't see the kind of results we want to see. It's a fact, and the kind of impact that you have referred to. But I can point to a few things that people obviously are familiar with. We've just, the President has signed into law the establishment of the National Council of Gender-Based Violence Bill, which was a target of the NSP. It took a while, but that's in the nature of developing laws and passing laws. But finally, we are happy that we are here. Again, to come back to your issue of capacity, colleagues, the President signed this into law in May, just before elections. And instead of us, we are requested, like yesterday, to establish this council. But we have to go back to National Treasury because there's just no money to establish this. Not because we have not been talking or advocating or lobbying, but we don't have the necessary resources, but we are in the process. We've been engaging with National Treasury to actually get the necessary resources to implement the strategy. I mean, to establish the council. You are aware of the bills, the 3 bills. Again, another target of the NSP, which were signed into law to actually strengthen the legal system and its response to gender-based violence. In terms of the prevention, again, we lifted, because from a policy perspective, we lifted out Pillar 2, which is critical, and I said earlier on, we need to be invested in Pillar 2. Yes, you are right. There have been those evidence-based programs in terms of prevention that we need to roll out. The only way that we are beginning to do this, and I'm saying beginning, because we are working with civil society organizations to actually roll out these programs that have been identified. We have developed the prevention strategy specifically so that we have clear targets that actually allows us to actually roll out these programs. Again, we don't have the necessary resources. We again depend on partners who are skilled in terms of and knowledgeable about these programs on how to roll them out, to be able to take them at the level of community. And we have engaged with KZN, KwaZulu-Natal, because that's where we want to start implementing the concept of the dealing with GBV as a pandemic. So we are in a position now, despite the constraint of resources, to actually roll out these programs. You've mentioned the 100-day challenge. The 100-day challenge is one of the evidence-based programs. We started with about 30, I think 7 programs when we started 3 years ago, yes, partnering with the service providers who are rolling out the 100-day challenge. We are now sitting at projects that are about 70 in different provinces where they are. So we're going to see, I think in the next few weeks, the results of those programs that have been rolled out at community level. And I must mention that one of the things that we have done, because that's going to help government and us to work at local level, as I mentioned earlier on, is to bring in the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, so that we are able, they're closer to communities, but we also want them to take responsibility for actually localizing the National Strategic Plan and working with communities. It has been a struggle, but they're now fully on board. One of the things that we are trying to do to strengthen the system, apart from what I said earlier on, because we recognize that there's a lot of work in the country that is happening, done by both civil society and provinces and some of the local government. But we are not able to get all the information and the report and account for the work that is happening. So what the department has done, and we have been assisted by the European Union, is to actually put technical monitors, what we call technical monitors and data collectors in offices of the Premier. We started with 3 provinces. Now we have located them in all the 9 provinces, because you need human bodies who will actually go to sites. If NPA says, I've established a TCC, and a TCC is working, you need a whole body from the government side to go there on a site and see, and actually see whether that TCC is performing as expected, whether there are necessary resources, etc. But also data collectors to begin to, through COCTA and what we call rapid response teams that we have established, and there are more than 40 now, they are not enough, to be able to actually pick up these cases and do the necessary referrals to services in those communities. So we're relying on all these home bodies to help us. What I'm saying in short, Tando, is there are weaknesses in the system. What we are doing is trying to strengthen those systems in the way that I've mentioned. It's not perfect. We're not there yet. But the reality is these things take time, but they also take resources to be able to do them, fast-track them, and implement them as quickly as possible. So this is long-term, but at least we've started the process. I can't, apart from the 100-day challenge initiative that we have, say we are implementing program 1 or 2. But the fact is, DSD, for instance, and this has started even long before the NSP. Yes, I'll end with this point. Has been rolling out parenting programs. So I think this kind of programs and the work that departments are doing needs to really be recognized. I'm not sure, I can't speak about the effectiveness of those programs. And I think the Department of Social Development would be in a better position to actually respond to that question. So there are challenges. I'm not going to sit here and say we are doing well. We could do better, but there are constraints, but we're trying to work as best we can under the circumstances.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Maluleke. Okay, let's move on to then Ms. Michelle. You had spoken about very critically accountability, but I'd like to give you this opportunity to just elaborate on what does effective, impactful accountability look like? And I'd like you to just summarize that maybe in about 2 minutes. What does effective, impactful, meaningful accountability look like?
Tando, accountability can only in reality happen when we all take responsibility. So there has to be a need, there has to be a level of responsibility. And if we're looking at a leadership, we look at top leadership, we're looking at civil society level, we're looking at business level, and so on and so forth. There has to be very clear responsibilities that are outlined so that then we can actually account for it. I wanted to bring something up. You know, we talk about the National Strategic Plan, but we need, when we look, for example, in the 2000s, if I'm not wrong, when the AIDS Council was created, when we had the AIDS, during the AIDS pandemic, right? There was a sense of urgency.
Yes.
And there was a sense of urgency that brought government together, civil society, and the private sector, right? We have a recent example now with COVID. When people felt and saw the numbers and it was coming close to home, almost on 24-hour level, there was a response in this country that brought business, civil society, and government. My question is, where's the sense of emergency when it comes to GBV? And that's why we are looking at the National Strategic Plan, and we still have the council being, approved now. Right? That's why we look at the National Strategic Plan and we say there are no funds. Sorry, sis. But it's like, no, but really, where is the, because when we human beings look at certain issues and we look at death like that, then we are able to mobilize, at all levels to actually respond. The issue with gender-based violence is that is not happening. So I needed to talk about that. And I needed to bring this sense of community, and when we look at responsibility and then to accountability, bringing the three legs again, to work together. Then there was, sorry, I need to mention the issue of accountability. When you look, for example, at the Tutuzela centers, for example, right? And because of my work as a survivor of violence and with the Kuhluka movement, we are very much in touch, and we see in the ground throughout the country the victim rooms, for example, in the police stations. I think it's going to be a bit unfair for government to expect to implement these things and to monitor. I think there has to be, when we look at this partnership of government, civil society, and private sector, then we can also give those kind of responsibilities to communities and to NGOs, for example, at the community level. So, for example, we work, when it comes to evidence-based interventions, Kuhluka movement is doing circles of support in the poorest of communities in this country. So you go to Limpopo, you go to the Eastern Cape. What we do is to actually capacitate women in the community to be able to hold support groups for victims of violence and for their families. Because, yes, we are not equipped to deal with this pandemic. We're not equipped, we don't have the capacity to have psychologists, psychiatrists at the level that would be necessary. So what we do is look at those leaders in the communities, those women who normally during the week or during the weekend open their houses to actually bring churches, to have church services, and so on. So they've shown leadership at community level. So we train those women so that every 2 weeks, they hold meetings in the communities for victims and survivors to share their experience, to advise each other, to lead, and for example, explain what the legal process is all about. Do the the follow-up with these women, go to court, come back, family meetings, all these complicated issues. So these women are in the communities to do that. These are the same that can be used to look at accountability, because they go to the police stations. They follow these, the survivors and the victims. So they are able to say, listen, police station ABCD, victim rooms are not working. Tutuzela Center, this is what's missing, this is what's missing. And then we create a very, active system of feedback so that we can deal with the issue and go in and ensure that we do have accountability.
Thank you so much. And then finally, Mr. Wilkinson, my question to you, you had spoken about the fact that there's so many broken homes as a result of fatherlessness. But gender-based violence is something that affects not just poor people, not just African people. We can understand the context of families having been broken because of colonization and apartheid and the white capitalist exploitative machinery. But there are also white women and white families that also experience gender-based violence and femicide. And so the other thing is that we speak about families needing men, and yet men are the ones that leave their families. Men are the ones who leave women in the birthing rooms to give birth to children on their own. So my question really is to you, for this bad behavior, and how do we meaningfully and impactfully get to a place where men take accountability, leadership, and responsibility in society at large? But practically, and please not theoretically, but what does this actually look like even from a socialization perspective? Just in about 3 minutes or so, thanks.
It's very simple. We raise good men. We're not doing enough to raise good men. All of these issues, often we're dealing with the symptoms. And the symptom is an abused woman. And that should never, ever, ever, ever happen. And I just want to weep when I hear your story and other stories. Good men don't do that. But bad men don't just... We expect men to arrive at adulthood, okay. We expect a woman to go to a police station and report a rape to a policeman who himself might be an abuser, who himself might have been raised badly and the wrong role models, and he himself doesn't know what it means to be a man. Men don't arrive at adulthood without being raised well to be good men. They don't arrive, they're going to arrive at problems. So we need to invest a lot more in fathering and raising men to be good men. Because it's very much like a motor vehicle. You know, a motor vehicle is a very useful thing. It's a gift to society. So is a taxi, everything. But only if it's driven well. Motor vehicles are also very dangerous. Many thousands of people are killed on the roads every day. There's nothing wrong with a car. We can't say there's something wrong with men. It's those cars are being driven badly. Now, masculinity is very much like that. It needs to be taught, nurtured, modeled, shown how to behave masculinely. You know, men are physically stronger than women. Men have testosterone that drive them to do certain things. That needs to be controlled and harnessed and driven well. And just like a motor vehicle, you cannot learn how to drive a motor vehicle from a YouTube clip. You can't drive a motor vehicle from someone who's never driven a motor vehicle. You need someone who knows how to drive a car to teach you how to drive a car. You need someone who is a man who's learned how to be a good man, harness his masculinity well, to teach younger boys how to be good men. Otherwise, those testosterone-fueled young boys are going to grow up to men who are driven badly and behave badly. So we can't just say we need to hold men accountable. We need to raise boys to be good men. Because if we raise boys to be good men, we'll have a society of good men. That policeman who has a rape reported will weep when he sees a woman having been raped, and he'll take all the necessary actions. A father who a man impregnates a woman would do everything in his power not to run away, not to abandon that child, because he's a good man. Men inherently are designed to be a gift to society. To love, to serve, to honor, to protect, to provide, to wash the feet of our women, never ever to abuse them. That's what masculinity is. And we need to raise boys to be good men. And that's how we'll make them accountable.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilkinson. In our conversation, folks, in our conversation this morning, we focused about, quite frankly, there's just a lack of meaningful and impactful budgeting, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Because to get to this point and not have evaluated the impact of the NSP is not really where we should be as a society. And we need to be quite frank about that. The private sector not coming to the party, even though they participate in much of the gender-based violence that is being experienced in society, is unacceptable. And as Ms. Marshall said, everyone really has a role to play. There's a lot of effort that needs to be done insofar as healing historical trauma, because that trauma may very well be the reason why violence in our society in general manifests itself in such a gruesome manner. We did not do a good job in healing our society. And it may sound like a superficial and unimportant concept, but healing our society may very well be one of the greatest and most enormous projects of the democratic dispensation and of our time, and we do need to invest in that. I'm going to then ask for, as we close, panelists, if you can please tell me in 1 or 2 sentences, I'll give you a maximum of a minute. What is your vision for the future? Now, I'm speaking as a leader, not just as the layperson, but as a leader in your respective fields. What does an ideal future look like? What is the vision of the future? And how do you propose that we get there?
My dream, Thando, because that's the question you're asking. It's simple. It's a South Africa free from gender-based violence. For me, it's as simple as all that. As a leader or an ordinary citizen, but a woman for that matter, I want to be in a place and situation where I can walk at 12 midnight in my neighborhood and not fear anything. And there are countries like that where you walk very late in the evening and you don't worry and look over your shoulder. That's my dream. How we get there? Yes, I speak as a person that is responsible from government, but I know what the limitations of government are. That even if we had millions of rands in the bank, this problem is going to take all of us, government, leading, of course, and accounting to society, but every one of us needs to rally and actively ensure that we achieve that dream.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moileke. Ms. Marshall?
Of course, it's a world that is free of gender-based violence. But I think there's one way particularly that I would like to bring it in, is that all of us in the world, particularly in South Africa, look at the issue of gender-based violence as a war, which means then that they are perpetrators. There are two sides, big two sides. One is victims, the other ones are perpetrators. The third that I want to bring in is the bystanders. You know, the ones that pretend that they don't see, they don't hear, they don't feel it. And I want to identify these standbys, you know, as the ones that actually perpetrate a lot more gender-based violence. So we need all of us to take a position and say, are we victims, are we perpetrators? And actually decide, because being a perpetrator doesn't really need that you killed, you beat, and so on and so forth. If you are silent and allow this to happen in your house, in your community, in your workplace, then you need to identify yourself as perpetrator. The moment we do that, we will look at this pandemic in a different way. So I think I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Mr. Wilkinson?
For me, this is not a male-female issue, it's a human issue. And my dream is that all of us, you know, before I'm a man, I'm a human being. Before I'm a South African, I'm a human being. Before I'm a Christian, I'm a human being. Before I'm white, I'm a human being. And that identity trumps everything else. Everything else is a flavor. So for me, my dream is that we all see each other as equally valuable human beings, worthy of equal opportunity, worthy of equal rights, worthy of equal respect. And if we can get that and teach that and stop polarizing and begin to see each other as that, all of these issues will fall away. And that's my dream.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson.
Sure. My dream would be really to see young people of this country, even, to be developed to their potential. And that would mean that even the leaders that could probably have a little bit more self-awareness. I would really like to see us having more insight and understanding of what is happening, to be more curious and as a people. And at the same time, if it was like China, and I'm sorry, it would be like, today we plant 1 million trees and we do it. I would really like to see a government that is decisive, that is bold. And I'd like to see accountability. Some people should have lost their jobs now, even with NSP. That's my feeling. And I feel we're too nice. And anything that has got to do with lobbying for that, I would be in the forefront. And another thing that my dream would be to say, to CG particularly, please, the proposal for you for the GBV index, please let's do that. And I also like say recommendations that are made by by CGE within this program, and how I believe it could happen. Another thing is that if there was anything like National Skills Fund, let it happen, that NSB fund, but that will probably sit within CGE. And I would truly say, let's have more self-awareness, self-insight, please. Let's also develop ourselves. That will be my dream.
Thank you so much. That is the end of the first panel for this inaugural conference, folks. Thank you so much. We will be taking questions and answers later on. during our second or our upcoming panel sessions. So please keep your questions with you, and we'll make sure that you have an opportunity to ask the relevant questions later on. Thank you so much for your great audienceship. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.